introduce our first speaker. And our first speakers are from the Agency for Commerce and Community Development. We have Richard Amore and Gary Holloway. Welcome, Richard and Gary. And they're going to share some of the resources around the Downtown Transportation Fund, better connections, better places. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Richard and Gary.
Gary, you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. Hey everyone, this is Gary Holloway. I'm the Downtown Program Manager in the Department of Housing and Community Development at the Agency of Commerce. I'm glad to see such a great group here, a lot of familiar faces. I wanted to touch on just a couple funding opportunities as it relates to some of the work that you may be doing with your projects. We have a Downtown Transportation Fund, which are grants that are made available to municipalities in our designated downtowns, as well as village centers that have been through a robust planning process like the Better Connections program. This past year, we had a $5 million bump in the program thanks to the legislature. So we're able to expand the program and increase grants to $200,000 with a 20% match. And these grants are really designed for to build off of some of these demonstration projects that you may be doing with transportation enhancements, to make them more permanent improvements, to improve safety and bike pedestrian connections, and help make our downtowns and villages more attractive and accessible. So those grants will be announced later next month. Municipalities will have until March to get applications together, and we'll award them in April. Another funding opportunity that we have, which is not a lot of time left to apply, but I want to make this group aware that this funding is out there to support your communities. Vermont Tourism and Marketing has Tourism and Economic Recovery Regional Marketing Grants. We have $600,000 that was approved by the legislature this year to help build off of some of the marketing efforts we did last year. And this money is really meant to help encourage local organizations to collaborate together on regional marketing efforts to highlight the diverse and unique assets that we have in our communities and regions, to try to bring tourism and in-state Vermonters into regions that they otherwise might not travel to, or out-of-state visitors who've encourage them to come and take a day trip or a weekend. So the idea behind these grants is to fund $10,000 to $30,000 grants to organizations that can collaborate together around these marketing efforts and bring people into our communities. So I'll leave it at that. That deadline is next week, November 3rd. So if you didn't have time to put an application together, you certainly have time to be a partner and support these efforts. So I'll pass it off to Richard. Thank you.
Great. And thanks, Gary. That was great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard Amore, Planning and Outreach Manager with the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. I'm going to share about a couple different funding opportunities today. One of them first is the Better Connections Planning Grant Program, which is a partnership between VTrans, the Agency of Commerce, Department of Health, and Department of Environmental Conservation. And it provides grants to local communities to develop robust planning processes and downtown and village revitalization plans, and supports the kind of integration of land use planning with transportation and stormwater management planning, and really looking at a deep dive and a holistic kind of planning effort with the resources to really engage the community through a robust public involvement process, as well as connecting to state funders to help support implementation of the plan. The planning grant program through Better Connections offers grants up to about $100,000 to do these local planning processes, and we run it every other year. So the program won't be launched again until fall of 22. But it's a great project or a great program to support local planning efforts that really need a little bit more robust resources than some of the other traditional grant programs that planning grant programs that the state offers. Next, I just want to quickly plug, and I know Ben may talk about this a little bit more, but we do offer grants and incentives for renovating historic buildings as well. And these can be community gathering places in our villages and downtowns, And we often think of placemaking outdoors, but it can also be indoors, especially here in Vermont with our long winters. So we offer the downtown and village center tax credits, which can help rehab historic buildings and designated downtowns and designated village centers. Can bring those buildings up to code or do facade improvements, as well as we offer the Historic Preservation Grant Program to support building rehabilitations of historic buildings in our communities. And both those grant programs can help bring buildings back to life and become community gathering areas in our communities. And then lastly, I just want to announce, and we're going to talk more about it later this morning during one of the breakouts, but the legislature, after a couple of years of working hard with our partners, appropriated $1.5 million to stand up a new program called Better Places. And it will be a statewide placemaking grant program that provides grants ranging from $5,000 to $40,000 to create, revitalize, or activate public spaces in Vermont's designated downtowns, village centers, new town centers, or neighborhood development areas. And the Better Places Partnership is a joint program with the Vermont Community Foundation, Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as our crowdfunding partner that we're working to bring on board this fall to help stand up the program. The program is unique in the design where it's a 2-to-1 reward matching grant program. The communities have to raise 1/3 of their match through a crowdfunding mechanism, and then the state will reward whatever they raise from a 2-to-1. So if a community raises $5,000, we'll give you a $10,000 grant to support activation or creation of public spaces in our communities. And I'll share more about the Better Places program later, and feel free to reach out. But it is the state's kind of first launch into supporting these types of grassroots community-driven placemaking projects. And we will be announcing it in January and accepting projects throughout 2022. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard and Gary. Fantastic resources from ACCD. Next up, I'm going to introduce Michelle Bailey from the Vermont Arts Council.
Hello, everyone. I'm here today to tell you about a few programs that we have. The most probably relevant one at the moment for you all to know about is our Animating Infrastructure Grant Program. Through this program, we help to fund public art projects in community infrastructure. So the grants range anywhere from up to $5,000 to $15,000. And we have a grant seeker workshop coming up on November 18th, and the deadline for just a letter of interest, not a full proposal, but a letter, will be due December 16th. So I'll put a link to that in the chat, but I also have that we fund here related to historic buildings. We have our cultural facilities grant project program that also helps to fund improving the usability of cultural facilities for arts and cultural programming. It's kind of the nuts and bolts of keeping a building open: heating systems, electrical, accessibility, fixed equipment, those kinds of things. And those grants range up to $30,000, and those do require a 1-to-1 match. And then also I wanted to share a little bit. We do have small project grants. They're called Arts Impact Grants. These placemaking projects could also be funded through those. Those grants will likely have a spring deadline with more information coming later on, but those are some possibilities to help support your work in your community. So I'll just leave it at that because I know we have a lot to go through, but we will be providing a lot of information at that grant seeker workshop for animating infrastructure coming up in a few weeks. So I hope to see some of you there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michelle. And we'll make sure we also share out these links after the workshop, because I know sometimes it's hard to get them all down in the chat. So we'll make sure that we get all of that to everybody. All right, so next up, we've got Ben Doyle from Preservation Trust of Vermont. Ben.
Hey, thanks, Kelly. Hey, everybody. My name is Ben Doyle. As Kelly said, I'm the president of the Preservation Trust of Vermont. It's wonderful to see all of you. For those of you that don't know the Preservation Trust of Vermont, we're an organization that builds community through the preservation and revitalization of Vermont's historic built environment. And so, you know, I think one thing I just really want to emphasize is that all of these kind of grant resources aren't really they shouldn't be viewed in isolation, right? It's really about how do you stack them all to make a project work really well. And I think one of the things that we do well at the Trust is we're kind of like the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down in trying to like connect and fill gaps in some of the grant funding. So, you know, I'll talk specifically about some of the grants that we have, but I would really encourage those of you that are involved in projects around preservation of historic buildings or gathering places in Vermont to think about us, because our field staff does a great job of providing technical assistance to folks, you know, doing site visits, looking at a building with you, thinking about it, and then thinking about what are the resources or what's the process for a revitalization project. And so we often provide very kind of small matching grants for building assessments through our Robert Cincerbo Fund grant program. It's just a one-to-one match that can help you do a building assessment to see what you have. And that's a very kind of low barrier grant program. It's really just a conversation about what you're trying to do, and then we try to move forward on it. We can also try to connect you to other funders and think with you about, you know, some of the programs that Richard mentioned, grants through the Division for Historic Preservation or tax credit program. Think with you about how to leverage those with other resources. And then we also maintain a number of other implementation grant programs that can be leveraged, including the Paul Brune Village Revitalization Grant Program that's actually open right now. And that's a grant program of projects for preserving historic and revitalizing historic gathering places in communities. That's up to $50,000 to $100,000 grant program. It's actually open right now. A letter of eligibility is needed from the Division for Historic Preservation by November 15th. So you can find out more information about that on our website. But we also have a whole other kind of suite of grant programs, including in partnership with the 1772 Foundation, the Freeman Foundation, for various regions in the state to help with different kinds of preservation projects. And I'll share a link that lists all of those. And then, you know, just one other thing that we do too is a lot of barn assessment grants. Like if there's a historic barn that's looking for some kind of adaptive reuse, that's a program where we can help with that assessment that can then line you up for an implementation grant from the Division for Historic Preservation. So there's a lot of resources, and I don't want people to get bogged down in them. I just want to really leave you with the idea that if you have a project like this, we'd be happy to have a conversation with you. Think about the whole suite of funding options that are available and try to point you in the right direction. So thanks for all that you're doing.
Thanks so much, Ben. I like that, a spoonful of sugar. That was great. But just making all of those connections and layering the different funding resources is so important to the success of any project. All right, next up, we've got Suzanne Kelly from the Department of Health. Suzanne.
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Suzanne Kelly. I work for the Vermont Department of Health. I oversee our Healthy Community Design program, and our funding is, there's a less of it than the folks who have been talking before me, and it's a little bit more transitory. Sometimes I have it, sometimes I don't. But I'll say that typically we would give out small grants of about $10,000 to $20,000 to do things to increase access to physical activity and healthy food. So these could be doing things like walk audits, sometimes making improvements to downtowns or crosswalks or bike lanes, beautifying parks to draw people down to parks. So anything around increasing or looking at mixed use development, improvements to bike and pedestrian type facilities, parks, recreation, and open space, and access to healthy food. Access to healthy food, I'm going to be talking about a little bit later in one of the breakout groups, but this could be things like trying to establish farmers markets or farm stands in areas to give people access, thinking about just some policies in a community to make sure that there's land set aside for these sorts of things. What else? So just things like that, signage, wayfinding sign, kiosks, things like that, to really encourage people to use facilities or resources in a community that will increase their physical activity and access to healthy food. Another thing that I'll mention, so I'll put a link to our website that describes a lot of these types of projects. The other thing that the health department has are offices of local health in each of 12 district areas. And in normal times, non-COVID times, there is staff in those offices that could help with technical assistance and support around assessments, about connecting people. A lot of those folks work with their town or regional planners. So they could be a really good resource if you're just thinking or not quite sure about how to go about accessing funding or resources around this healthy community design idea. As other folks mentioned, many of their funding resources might require match. Typically, my funding will not ever require match. I've never required that before. So that's just something to keep in mind. And in the next year or so, there's probably going to be even more opportunities for funding in communities because of some COVID and equity funds that are coming, and the health department looking at establishing health equity zones in different communities around the state of high need, looking at some priority populations and how to really connect health resources, community development, and just really supporting populations who have been really at high risk of not accessing health resources as others. So more to come, and I typically will advertise my funding opportunities through all the partners here and ask them to send out information through their listservs when I have funding resources available.
Great. Thank you so much, Suzanne. All right, we're going to move next on to V-Trans, and we'll start with Jacky first, sharing some of the technical guides that are available.
Always with the mute. Good morning. I'm Jacky Casino. I'm a transportation planner with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. And so on a related but slightly different vein, I'm here to discuss agency programs that enable municipalities or community groups to initiate placemaking or art on state transportation facilities. So when we think of those iconic pieces in Vermont, like Church Street Marketplace in Burlington or the Whale Tails in Williston that you can see as you're driving on 89, those are placemaking projects that are really often are found on private land or municipal land. But what if your community is interested in doing something such as a mural on an interstate underpass, testing a crosswalk or a sidewalk in a rural town or village that technically is on a state highway? That's when you'd come to us. These are often technicalities that community groups aren't necessarily thinking of, but there is a whole roadway classification structure in the state. And so, you might be thinking like, oh, this surely is a town road. I just have to go to the town to get permission. But oftentimes it is a state road. And that's when you would have to work with the town as well as the agency in order to get your project done. So 2 programs I'd like to discuss today aren't funding programs, but they're really enabling policies and technical assistant programs that help different towns and communities across the state be able to take their idea and execute it. And so one I'd like to start with is the demonstration projects. So many of you are probably familiar with what these are, but the idea is that they're temporary in nature. So any temporary change to a physical characteristic and design of a roadway for the purpose of taking a look at, is this an effective change to put a crosswalk or a sidewalk here? That is a demonstration project. So a few years ago, the agency realized we've been getting more and more requests for these from communities that were interested in doing this sort of work, whether it was a crosswalk or a sidewalk or a median, things like traffic calming to slow traffic, street trees, things like that you often think about visually when you're in our downtowns or villages. How can communities that don't have those go about testing those, see if they're functional, if it's working, if there's community support and buy-in, right? So the idea is, trying it on before you buy it, right? So you think that would be easy, but we needed to go through our policies, take a look at what we could allow, and so we put this program together in order to help folks be able to do just that. So if a community is interested in that, the idea behind it is you will eventually have to have something called an 1111 permit, a state highway and access permit, but it can be complicated and cumbersome depending on how complex, how big you want to go with your project, and that's where you would call us. So any of the transportation planners within the agency can help walk you through this. So the idea is that you would come to us with a design or a concept, and then we would help work through and massage that, like what's allowed based on safety, roadway speeds, the amount of cars that are there, the type of structure you're interested in putting something on. So all those technicalities that, again, a community might not be thinking of at first, are all the details that we have to work with our engineers at the agency and iron out. And so, we really are here to help walk you through that process.
Jacky, thank
Yeah.
you so much. I'm sorry, but we're running a little tight on time, and it was 2 minutes each. So I'm sorry to cut you off. But if you could also provide the link to the other guide for public art, that would be fantastic. Sorry. All right, I'm going to turn over to John, and then we'll go to Karen from Locomotion.
All right. Good morning, everyone. John Kaplan with VTrans. I'm the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator. And I already put in the chat a couple of links. So we have 2 different grant programs that can fund bicycle and pedestrian projects, or like feasibility studies if you need to get some more detail on what a project might entail and what it would cost and so forth. So the 2 programs are both within our municipal assistance section, where all of our municipal grants are housed. And so one is the Transportation Alternatives Program, and I believe their grant cycle is open right now. And on that municipal assistance page, there's actually a link to all the grant programs and the timing for all of those. And then the Bicycle and Pedestrian Program, which typically opens up for applications in April each year. So both of those programs are primarily federally funded with an 80-20 match. The Bike and Ped program also has some state funds for smaller scale projects, so like crossing improvements or marking bike lanes, things like that. And that has been a 50-50 match for construction of those projects, but we are reconsidering whether that match can change to 80-20. And then the other link I put in there was just a page that we put together of pretty comprehensive list of design resources for bike and pedestrian projects. So I really encourage you to go look there, whether you're getting funding from us or not. There's great resources there for kind of designing quality bike and ped facilities.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate that. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Yakos from Locomotion.
Hi. Hi. This is Karen. I'm the executive director of Locomotion. So we partner with a lot of the funding sources you just heard from here, especially VTrans, but others as well. And we don't provide grants ourselves, but we can be co-applicants on some of those grants. We can also provide all kinds of technical services. I'm going to go through some of them that relate to placemaking in this conference. We do community technical assistance. So we have someone who works with communities. I see some names on here I recognize on the call, to do complete streets work. So looking at crosswalks and sidewalks and bike lanes, bike paths, that kind of thing. We work with kids as well on some of those things. We also can set up valet bike parking in your town, which is a place where you can attract people to come by bike. The bikes are watched while an event is going on, like farmers markets is a common thing. If it's okay with Kelly, I'm going to share a slide really quick to explain probably the most important thing for you all.
So Karen, I'm going to ask if you share that slide in the small group discussion, because we've got like just you've got like 1 minute left.
Okay, so just explain it's just a picture of this because it's harder to see sometimes, but we have a pop-up trailer. So when Jacky was talking about demo projects, we can help communities mock up those projects on all roads. We can work on any roads, but we do work with the state some as well on this. And it's fun. You put paint on the road that's temporary. You can make a crosswalk. You can make a fun crosswalk with colors and all kinds of things to show the community what that might feel like and look like, and what a bump out might look like, or a bike path or protected bike path. We have a lot of fun things in the trailer, and we can bring that to your town. And I'm going to put a link to more information on that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karen. And I'm sorry I had to cut some of you short. Lots of resources. I just also want to give a quick plug. ARP is offering our winter placemaking micro grants that are out. The deadline is November 12th. We have 6 mini grants available at the amount of $4,000 each that can help support winter placemaking, whether that's some changes to the built environment or winter programming. And we also have a number of great audit tools as available on our Livable page as well, ARP Livable Communities. So check that out. We will definitely be sending out the resources. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for providing those resources, and also give a plug for the small group discussions that will be happening at 10:30. We're going to go ahead and just take a quick couple minute stretch or bio break before we kick off our main session at 10 o'clock, which is just a couple minutes. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our second day of our 4th annual placemaking workshop. For those who are just joining us today, welcome. We'd love to hear where you're calling in from. So if you could open up the chat and just let us know where you're joining us from, that would be great. And for those who were here yesterday, we'd love to hear if you have any aha moments yesterday or anything that is particularly inspiring you. We had a great day yesterday, focusing on the importance of creating and activating public spaces that are inclusive in order to support equity in our communities. We heard from artists and community change makers about different strategies that we can use to engage community members in the process of placemaking. Today, we are focusing on winter placemaking, and we will also have some small group discussions to dive a little bit deeper into some of the key ingredients and components that go into building great places. And then lastly, we will hear from our panel of presenters from showcasing different Vermont examples of placemaking. And I also want to share, before I introduce our first speaker, Jane Armstrong from 880 Cities, is just to share some of the slides that all of you sent over to me yesterday. Some of them I got this morning as well. And these are just representing some of our favorite places in Vermont. And hopefully all right, let's see here. There we go. All right. And so I'm just going to go ahead and some of these images are just beautiful. All right. Thank you all for sending in pictures. I got a couple last minute ones this morning that I wasn't able to incorporate, but I really want to appreciate you for sharing those, and we'll definitely share out those images afterwards as well. It's great to see all the beautiful places in our state. And now I would like to introduce Jane Armstrong from 880 Cities. She's in Toronto, and ARP has had the distinct pleasure of working with 880 Cities for the last couple of years, working on this winter placemaking guide, as well as a guide focused on people who are experiencing homelessness as well, and that relationship with our parks and public spaces. So Jane is going to talk about the guide on winter placemaking and specifically how important this is to advancing equity in your community. Equitable winter placemaking acknowledges that some communities face greater barriers that others do not in staying warm, feeling represented, accessing the joys of winter physically, financially, and socially. And for many of us, winter can take a heavy toll on our mental and physical health, increasing our own risks for social isolation. So Jane will be sharing the findings from the guide and best practices and showcase how winter placemaking can help reinvigorate community cohesion and spark joy during a time of year that is often perceived as bleak. So I want to welcome Jane, and also if everybody could take a moment and just open up the chat and share your favorite things about winter. We'd love to hear what you love best about winter. Maybe it's an activity, maybe it's a feeling that you have during winter, but please just share what you're looking forward to about winter. And without further ado, Jane, welcome. And
Thank you, Kelly. Quite the introduction. Slides look good from your perspective?
They look great.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me, everyone. Our goal here today is to introduce you to the guide and the tools that come with it. So the goals of the guide is to address distinct winter challenges that communities of all sizes experience by offering practical solutions that can create more equitable, engaging, and age-friendly public spaces during the winter season. Special considerations are made for rural and rural winter communities who face unique opportunities in winter placemaking. In this guide, we use an equity-based approach to provide the inspiration and tools needed for community changemakers to better leverage existing public space assets to embrace winter placemaking. So quick thanks to AARP, to Kelly, Rebecca, the whole team. This idea was created with the brilliant minds from the Rural Lab and the whole AARP team, and it is positioned as an addendum to the Creating Parks and Public Spaces guide that we previously worked on with AARP. So a quick introduction to myself and who I represent. I'm from a group called 880 Cities. We're a not-for-profit organization based in Toronto, but we work internationally. Our mission is to improve the quality of life for people in cities, no matter age, ability, or socioeconomic status or time of year. Our goal is to bring people together to transform mobility and public space. And we are guided by a simple question, but we believe it's powerful. What if everything we did in cities was great for an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old? We are guided by 3 rights, which is the right to mobility, the right to public space, and the right to participate. And we took these 3 rights into the guide to inspire the guide and our suggestions. So first right is the right to mobility. In a winter-friendly city, everyone, no matter their age, ability, should have the right to move safely and independently by walking, cycling, using public transit. But of course, the right to safe and active mobility in winter, especially those in North America, is not always guaranteed. We know that the right to mobility during winter is usually only afforded to cars. And we know this because streets are the plowing priority, often leaving sidewalks to be cleared by private ownership or not cleared at all. And of course, this has implications for our shared spaces, which have become the most neglected, which have disproportionate impacts on seniors, transit users, parents with children, people who use mobility scooters, communities who are not centrally located, and the list goes on. Winter has disproportionate impacts on equity-seeking groups. And of course, in North America, the right to mobility has been channelized indoors in winter. We've built our cities to avoid winter. And as of this, we've lost our right to mobility. So winter placemaking can be more than winter markets and light shows, which are fun and attractive, but winter placemaking should prioritize equity and access. And in the guide, we highlight several examples from across the states and Canada of people taking winter maintenance into their own hands, as well as municipalities who have stepped up to the plate to prioritize the pedestrian realm. The second right that has helped guide our organization and the guide is the right to public space. Everyone, regardless of where they live, should have access to high quality, maintained and programmed parks and public spaces. But we haven't designed public spaces to be fun and interactive, programmable places in the winter in North America. We have signs stating that this space is not cared for half the year. Essentially, cities turn their back to parks and public spaces. And these are communities who are not investing in livability year round, when we essentially say 6 months of the year, you cannot access the space safely. In North America, in North American winter communities, we shelter ourselves away for about 6 months of the year. Yet in Scandinavian countries, winter is simply a fact of life. Outdoor public life remains largely the same, and public spaces are designed to be used year-round, and maintenance is a priority as well. This is in Norway. This is a winter movie in the park. And winter life has been embraced, and winter assets have been embraced as well. Here they're using the fact that the sun has set early to their advantage to host a winter movie night about 4 p.m. in the afternoon after school times. I know this looks like it's about midnight, but they've used this winter element to their benefit. And thinking of winter as an asset is the backbone to the Winter Placemaking Guide. Innovative placemaking and winter projects do exist here in North America and are on the rise, as led by all you amazing folks in the room. These images are from the Winter Placemaking Lab in St. Paul. They've created community gathering spaces and activities throughout the winter months. This leaves us with our third right, which is the right to participate. We believe that everyone should have the right to participate in city building decisions. This means removing barriers to participation for groups that get left out of traditional consultation methods, like children, older adults, youth, lower income residents, and communities of color. We need to address those barriers if we want to build community that supports the other two rights. And winter placemaking can and should be based on community needs and assets. And the greatest asset is the power of partnerships. By partnering with community, hearing what they want from winter can lead to creative and successful winter placemaking that is representative of your community and your unique needs. It creates local buy-in, it creates the ability to scale up your projects in the future by creating winter placemaking that responds to local needs instead of bringing in, outside vendors in sort of sterile places. By embracing community assets, we can embrace all the power that winter placemaking has. Which brings us to the guide, which we hope to inspire you to build excitement about winter. The guide hopes to provide evidence to support winter placemaking in an age-friendly lens. The guide provides tools and ideas to implement winter placemaking as an equity-based approach in your community. And we hope the guide will inspire you to adopt a winter lens in all of your planning work. So you've seen pictures of winter markets and people gathered around bonfires, but what is placemaking really? What is winter placemaking really? At its core, it's about strengthening the connection between people and place. The practice of placemaking occurs when local communities have the power, capacity, and resources to actively shape public spaces in a way that meets their needs and improves the quality of life. Winter placemaking is a means to re-envision the ways that public spaces are created and used in winter in order to foster social connection, physical activity, and the many benefits of a vibrant public realm all year round. As the guide pays special attention to small and rural communities, we wanted to note how small and rural communities are rich in assets and are trailblazers of the lighter, quicker, cheaper movement and are expertly poised to invest in winter placemaking. The lighter, quicker, cheaper movement is often associated with tactile urbanism and big cities, but credit is due to rural communities who have time and time again proved that amazing things can be done by using their natural assets. So in the Winter Placemaking Guide, we highlight several examples from small, rural, mid-sized, and large communities across the states who have been embracing their assets for a warmer year and more fun time of the year for everyone. And in the guide, we dive into the benefits of winter placemaking through 3 topics: health, the economy, and social benefits. We believe, and hopefully we can convince you, that winter placemaking can combat social isolation, support the local economy, and can create opportunities for community connection. The first half of the guide introduces concepts around asset-based community development, placemaking, and placekeeping, and the importance of equitable winter engagement. The second half of the guide is broken into 4 pillars that you see here: winter mobility, winter fun and programming, winter warmth, and winter health and resources. The second part of the guide provides excellent examples of winter placemaking from communities of all sizes to inspire change within all of you. And the second part of the guide also provides introductory steps for how to do winter placemaking in your community. So just to break it down quickly, an asset-based lens is the first step to winter placemaking, and winter placemaking needs to be based on equity that deeply considers social spatial impacts of spaces. Community needs to be engaged and needs to be engaged in collaboratively designing winter places, programming and policy. Testing out ideas and gathering feedback is key to scaling up placemaking initiatives in the future. And of course, placemaking can and should be part of a larger community winter strategy, which is something we highlight in the guide and point to excellent examples from larger communities of Edmonton and Buffalo, but also smaller communities who have done excellent work like Marquette, Michigan, and the list goes on. Just to hone in on these asset-based approach to winter placemaking are these two examples as pulled from the guide called the Get a Grip in Lanark County, Ontario, and the Mainly Outdoors program in Maine, obviously mainly outdoors. These two small communities have leaned on local partnerships like the library and a wilderness outdoorsman to make winter placemaking happen. While it's at a smaller scale, that is exactly what the community needed and had assets at their disposal. You don't need great capital funds to make winter placemaking happen, as proven by these communities who have just over 800 people in their population. To talk about physical assets again, here's an example from Houghton, Michigan, who embraced their assets and their largest public space, which is their streets. So they transformed their streets into the Jibba Jabber Rail Jam, and this event brought locals and visitors alike to the downtown. Volunteers helped make shovel ramps and luges, and there was a place for a ski competition. Business owners loved it for the injection of life into the community. And this is to prove that smaller communities may think that because they don't have an identifiable downtown square or a main park in which to gather, placemaking can't be done. But Houghton, Michigan proved that community support, the power of volunteers, and the will to re-envision public space made winter placemaking a success. And this is in Perry, Iowa, who embraced their individual and cultural assets and the Los Posadas Festival. In previous years, the Los Posadas Festival was held in a recreation center outside of town, but the town of Perry embraced this cultural tradition and welcomed the event to take place in the downtown square. Los Posadas is a recreation of a biblical scene in which people go business to business caroling and food and drink flow. It is a family-friendly event that the town has met with open arms. Businesses stay open late, fire pits are added, and it has become a community celebration. In Perry, the town embraced local individual and cultural assets to activate the town square in a new creative way that responded to local culture, was based off local assets, and it responded exactly to what the community needed. So we hope that you find inspiration in the guide to adopt winter placemaking locally. And we know that Kelly here on the call has worked with us on the winter policy audit, which was in part inspired by the winter placemaking guide. In this audit, we partnered with Kelly and the city of Burlington to create the audit that documented both assets and barriers to placemaking at the local scale. So in the audit, we took stock of the assets and the barriers because in North America, we've planned around the car and around warmer winter. And as a result of this, we're bound to have restrictive policies in place that impede our attempts of activating public spaces in winter. So we took a winter lens to all policies around design and programming and identified some prohibitive language that either did not acknowledge winter or saw winter as a time to shutter all facilities and programming. When we want to create sustainable, vibrant public spaces, we need to acknowledge that these spaces have potential to function and support public life in winter as well, not just summer. So while this is a snapshot of our findings, it speaks to the power of language and the potential of placemaking. And can act as a starting off point for all communities to look inwards, asking what assets do I have, what barriers prevent a thriving winter life, and how can we embrace our partnerships and our assets to invest in winter placemaking locally. So I wanted to say, I hope you all read through the guide and are inspired to uncover your community assets. And we have a few other guides that we put out with AARP, including the home sister. So just before we get excited about, if you already put your answer in the chat, I look forward to reading it. But it is time for questions. So thank you so much for listening. And I hope I'm getting an internet connection is unstable notification. I hope that's not the case.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was terrific. I'm having some glitches on my end too. So I think we're all flexible through all of the Zoom issues. So thank you so much for showcasing the guide, and it's been just tremendous being able to work with 80 cities to dig deeper on the importance of winter placemaking. And I just want to go ahead and open up questions to folks. If you look at their toolbar at the bottom and look at the reactions, you open that up and just click raise hand, and then I can call on you and you can come off of mute and ask a question of Jane. So, but Jane, one of the questions that I'd love to ask you is just, what are some of the creative engagement tactics that you've seen that have been really impactful, and ones that have been sort of on the low cost end that have taken place in the winter? I'd love to hear some ideas from you.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is that Marquette, Michigan example. They have a great local skating trail, yeah, some community planners as well as some local politicians set up design charrette boards at the skating rink, and created an ideas festival, what we call it. It's a pop-up to hear what people want from winter. So by creating an attractive event, people come out and you collect their ideas while they're there. This was a way for Marquette to actually collect what assets they have at their ready, and hear what people want from winter. So from this, they created a winter community strategy, and I think they're a community of about 8,000. So not super tiny, but often communities think that they need to be big cities in order to have planning strategies around very specific topics like winter. But they proved that it was possible to speak to the community one-on-one outside of a regimented community engagement that would be in town hall. So yeah, by asking the community what they think their assets are, and embracing it in a whole winter strategy that has since had some really great outcomes. I encourage you to look it up or look it up in the guide. Yeah, they're the first ones that come to mind, but yeah, a great example of probably a low cost way to speak to the community, engage in some ideas festival type of placemaking, as using their assets, a skating rink, setting up some attractive elements for the whole family. Yeah, it was a great way to do some outreach.
Great, thank you, Jane. And one of the other questions I have for you too is just, what are some of the, if we're to sort of tackle some of the barriers that are going to have the biggest impact on winter mobility, what do you see those being?
Yeah, not prioritizing the pedestrian realm. We had an interview with a group in Chicago called My Block, My Hood, My City. And they have taken plowing of elementary schools and of low-income communities into their own hands. The core business district, the main street, is the only street that gets plowed, not even the sidewalks on the main street. So they've taken that initiative into their own hands. So of course, snow is a barrier, but also an opportunity. Yeah, just obviously winter impacts mobility so much, and the city does not prioritize the pedestrian realm at all. There's been some great examples in Eau Claire about I think the city purchased a very small trial run of a sidewalk plower, and they did a priority route, and that was paired with a walking trail during the pandemic, and people loved it. Shockingly, we love that we're able to get outside of our house in a safe way. So I think plowing and priority plowing is something that we need to rethink about. It's not just about cars anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So important. And I'm going to go to Jane Davies, and she has a question. Hi, Jane.
Hi. It seems like if there's snow, there's lots of opportunity for placemaking, but winter here in Southern Vermont, you can't count on it anymore. And so it would be nice to schedule events that could work with snow or without snow. Temperature isn't so much an issue because people can bundle up, but if you plan a little snowshoe walk around the town green and then there's no snow, that falls flat. So that's kind of a challenge here.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's something that the staff at City of Burlington were telling us as well. Like they used to have some odd amount of days out of the winter season that were like guaranteed for quality ice skating, and those are no longer guaranteed anymore. Of course, climate change is a huge impact to, you know, your ability to rely on winter. But there are some great examples I can think of from Vancouver, west coast of Canada. They don't often get snowy winters. They are pretty mountainous, but the city itself is rainy for like 80% of the year. And they have a few like winter placemaking activities. They call it Hot Tea Rain City, in which they set up like hot drink stations in community gathering spaces and sheltered places for people to still get warm because it's freezing, but it's raining. So there's some creative ways you can, work with your assets, work with what you got, which includes weather. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Thank you both. I'm going to actually ask John Kaplan if he could come off of mute and just share very quickly. He shared a comment in here around ADA accessibility and the importance of, you know, prioritizing pedestrian access. And maybe if John could just share a little bit of more information about his work with towns around plowing policies.
Sure, that'll teach me for putting something in the chat. Yeah, I mean, I have been, you know, basically if you go look at like federal highways guidance around sidewalks, there is kind of an expectation that you know, if it's a public facility, you can't just say it's closed for, like you pointed out, Jane, you know, for 6 months of the year because it's snowing. And as part of some trainings I've done with towns on ADA compliance and having a transition plan, one of the things we've talked about is sidewalk maintenance, and at least having, you know, at least thinking about it. So that's kind of this first step. And, you know, like I said in the chat, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the first place they will go, but having some kind of a reasonable policy. Now, reasonable, of course, is the tough word there because that's up to interpretation. But you know, if you have a snowstorm and like 5 days later there's still snow on the sidewalk, I think most people would agree that that's not acceptable. So having some kind of a policy that at least prioritizes, like you mentioned, routes to school, you know, or routes to the downtown. It's not saying like every single sidewalk in town is going to be plowed within a certain amount of time, but at least get towns to think about it and figure out what the priorities are going to be.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Sorry to put you on the spot there. I just think it's such an important piece around mobility and access and working with our towns to make sure that there is a plan.
Is that my computer or is Kelly glitching?
I think Kelly is frozen here, but there are a couple of comments here in the chat about creating intentional winter outdoor seating and gathering spaces in downtown or parks. And what do you use in those situations? Leaving out benches year round or something. Is there any furniture intentionally designed for year round use?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I know Better Block often has like downloadable like blueprints to winter seating. I think I've seen before, but I wouldn't say it's something that like, you know, you see all over the place. I know in Toronto we leave some of our infrastructure outdoors in the winter, but in our neighboring city, Montreal, they take up all of their bikes in the winter, and they often close like several benches in the winter as well. So I think, you know, leaving a bench out that works in the summer could also work in the winter. It might just be about, you know, will, but also, quality of the bench. And then there's another question on walk audit, specifically done in the winter time. We've done public life studies in the winter time. One of the images I shared was with our executive director, Amanda, doing a public life study in a park here to see how people are using the space in the winter. And, you know, spoiler alert, they weren't. But it was about the design of the space rather than people's like willingness. There was more pigeons than there were people, and there were more pigeons than there were benches. But yeah, I would encourage you to do a walk audit in the winter. That'd be something really interesting. And that's a tool we have in the creating parks and public spaces for people of all ages. Hi, Kelly, I see you're back.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry, thanks for your patience. My internet is decided to be on the fritz this morning, so my apologies. Thank you so much, Jane, and thank you for all the questions that have come in. I'm going to now transition us to our small group discussion so that we can dig a little bit deeper on some topic areas. And then we will come back at 11 for our final panel presentation, and we'll be hearing from the Old East End neighborhood in Burlington, Rupert, the Sheldon Store project in Rupert, Vermont, Wilmington, and the Confluence Park in Montpelier. So we've got a great lineup of panelists after our small group discussion so we can hear more about placemaking efforts in Vermont. And thank you so much, Jane, for showcasing the guide and also giving us some outside inspiration from other towns and communities outside of Vermont. It's always great to hear what others are up to. So small group discussions, you will be able to pick your breakout room. Again, unlike yesterday where we encouraged you to go back and forth into different breakout rooms, we're going to stay in one breakout room. We have just a half an hour in each for the breakout room. So we'd like people to stay in one that you choose. And I'm going to go through the list. We have a facilitator in each of the small group discussions who's also an issue area expert. So it's an opportunity to bring a project idea, a challenge perhaps that you're facing that is relevant to that topic area. So we will have crowd granting and a preview of the Better Places state program, and that will be Richard Amore from the Agency for Commerce and Community Development. Then we will have Streetscape. That will be Karen Yakos from Local Motion and John Kaplan from VTrans. You can hear a little bit more from them, especially if you were here for the optional session this morning. They've got a lot of great resources that they are able to share that they weren't able to get through all of this morning. Then we have a breakout session on working with diverse populations, and that is Laura Perez. We have programming and pop-up shops, Gary Holloway from Agency for Commerce and Community Development, Healthy Food Access, Suzanne Kelly from the Department of Health, Winter Placemaking. So if you want to dive even deeper into winter placemaking, we've got Jane for another half an hour. And then we've got Public Art and Community Spaces with Michelle Bailey from the Vermont Arts Council. And then Preserving Our Downtowns and Village Centers with Ben Doyle for Preservation Trust of Vermont. So we're going to go ahead and open up those breakout rooms. And then you can go ahead and choose them. And obviously for the facilitators, just you can go right into your breakout. And then we'll see you all back at 11. And if anybody has any issues getting into your breakout, just send me a note in the chat and I will help you. Or you can come off of mute. All right, I think everyone has made it safely back from the breakout rooms back to the main session. I want to give a big thanks to all of our facilitators for the small group discussions and helping to lead those. I really look forward to catching up with you afterwards to identify any important next steps or resources that are needed to be able to move forward to make better improvements around public spaces. So we're going to go ahead and transition to our final panel presentation, Lessons Learned from Vermont Communities. We'll be showcasing local efforts to reimagining public spaces. And we'll be hearing from 4 different communities in Vermont that represent different size communities, also different project type, and they're all at different stages of their work around placemaking. And I'm really excited to have these 4 presenters joining us today. We're going to go through and I'll introduce each presenter, and then after all 4 are finished with their presentations, then we will be able to have some time for Q&A. So first up, we are going to hear from Dave Cawley from the Old East End Neighborhood Coalition in Burlington. And Dave will be sharing about the work that they've been doing to expand winter access for all abilities and creating a sense of place in their neighborhood, which used to be just a place that people would drive through. So welcome, Dave, and it's wonderful to have you joining us again. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. And Laura will be advancing your slides, so you can just say click next.
Great. Well, thank you, Kelly, and good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here for actually the last couple of days to hear all the things that are going on. And I'm pleased to talk about really introducing you to our neighborhood and really to talk about we're a group of volunteers that we have been last year organized a fun and successful winter placemaking event. So we can talk a little bit about the, what were some of our successes and what are some of the things that we learned along the way. Next slide, please. So we live in the Old East End, which is actually a little recognized neighborhood in Burlington. Sometimes it's considered part of Winooski, sometimes it's lumped in with UVM and the hospital, and sometimes it's called the Centennial Neighborhood. But the area really has its own rich history. It's really very much the birthplace of Burlington because Ira Allen developed mills on the Burlington side of the Winooski River back in the mid-1780s. It's also home to Greenmount Cemetery, which is where Ethan Allen is buried. And it's home to Centennial Field and Centennial Woods. And of course, long before the Europeans, it was the home of Native Americans for over 9,000 years, with salmon runs at the falls of the Winooski River and the fertile lands of the Intervale, which really became welcoming for their settlement. So today, it's a neighborhood of about 1,600 people. It's a mix of renters, homeowners, seniors, families, young adults, and students. Next slide, please. About 3 years ago, neighbors started to join together to address street safety concerns that were, identified in an AARP neighborhood audit. And we banded together to advocate for safer pedestrian crossings, bike lanes, traffic calming, for our congested streets. And next, under the leadership of Sophie Quest, we proposed and installed a 24-foot mural that highlights the nature of the neighborhood and serves really as a reminder for travelers that our streets are more than just a transportation corridor. And around this time, we became known as the Old East End Neighborhood Coalition. Next slide, please. So after the mural project, we really began gathering on a more regular basis and started to focus on other ways to enhance the neighborhood. Well, placemaking became a theme because we sponsored a survey in which 90% of the people who live in the neighborhood didn't know the name of the neighborhood. We did also focus on a local park, which has really been a neglected entity in the city's park system. And so, for example, we started working on improving an access ramp to the park's facilities, and we built and we decorated benches that park users could move and move around the park for their use. Next slide, please. So our little group expanded to more neighbors and who wanted to join in, and neighbors became motivated to participate. And I think this was really because they felt rewarded by the opportunity to pitch in and really to achieve some results, even if it's on a small scale. We kind of really adopted a can-do attitude, and it really was a pleasure to work with people after 8 months of COVID and social isolation. So, you can see here the group includes old and young, retired folks, professionals, gender diversity, a wide set of experience and skills from arts to construction. And so last October, we began our winter placemaking activities. Next slide, please. So we quickly developed some overarching goals, such as opening a community center, encouraging outdoor activity, and helping to enlist others to really join in on future projects. Next slide. So our focus for winter placemaking became the neighborhood park, partly because it's underutilized as a winter resource, and perhaps more importantly, it can be perceived as a dark and foreboding place in the wintertime. So we quickly gravitated to the idea of a vision of using lighting as a centerpiece to make the park more welcoming. The park features a barn that dates back to the late 1800s, and we rallied around the idea of getting it opened as a community center. As you see in the photo on the right, one of our members used Photoshop to help us envision what the barn might look like with lights. So this really helped our group to focus some. Next slide. So within 2 meetings, and I guess we really opened the door because we're like, wow, there's so many things that we could be doing. We brainstormed this list, and we actually prioritized them about all the things that we could be doing in a winter placemaking event. And we envisioned sort of a month-long series of events in February. We divided up into several subcommittees, one including arts and activities, communications, hospitality, trail construction, and barn lighting. Next slide. Well, we sobered up a little bit in January when we realized that many of these activities would be difficult because of the hurdles to offer with in a COVID-safe manner. And so we modified our focus and we really slimmed it down to a self-directed activities that would ensure social distancing. And we kind of trimmed back our plans, what we had originally envisioned as a festival, bringing in other neighborhoods in Winooski. And we revised our communication strategy so we would target just the immediate neighborhood. We did things like flyering door to door, put up posters, and created postings on Front Porch Forum. Next slide, please. So by February, our vision tailored down, and this kind of spoke to some of the things that came up yesterday is, you know, when you have a broad vision, it may be better to tailor down a little bit and become a little bit more successful. So our vision started coming together in February. Next slide. And so we discovered the best way to engage the community was to provide materials and design ideas for festive lighting. You know, we created a how-to video and provided materials to create and decorate vellum lanterns, which were illuminated by LED candles. And we distributed the materials to volunteers and neighbors. And eventually we got about 50 households and over 150 lanterns made. They came together on a special night at the end of February when the lanterns were lit and burned over 3 days and nights. And many families came to tour the lights and take in the sights. Next slide. So we also created some trails suitable for trekking and snowshoeing that connected to Green Mountain Cemetery. They connected the park to Green Mountain Cemetery. Until this point, the only trail had been a very steep slope that was used for sledding, but the new trails provided a gentle winding route that could easily be followed by families and kids and seniors. And along the way, we created signs to highlight relics that still remain from when the land was used as a farm. And in the lower part of the cemetery, we uncovered the graves of a Civil War veteran and his family that had been lost to time and forest debris. So we created signboards so that the woods walkers could learn about this history. Next slide, please. And for families and kids, we created a story walk that really highlighted the joys of winter observation of nature in the quiet of the woods. Next slide. And our big project really was to outline that barn with LED lights. And so we created some, and we also created some giant snowflakes that were backlit. Our volunteers came together along with Burlington Parks and Rec in single-digit weather to string lights and to set up this special lighting. The parks provided a bucket truck, which enabled us to get up to the gable ends of the barn. And so it was really quite an effort. We illuminated nearby trees and created these things called wire light balls, which were also illuminated by LED lights. Next slide. So in the end, we created this beautiful beacon of light for the park, operated by timers. Many neighbors commented on how much they liked the lights, and they really gave them a special feeling. So, I think this sense of place was really successful. The lights remain today, and they will serve as a basis for our planning for this year for our second winterlude. And we still have all of our lantern signs and the story walk. Next slide. So this project was really completely planned by volunteers and executed by our volunteers, but we're also very thankful to the financial support that we got from our partners for this event as well. And finally, next slide. This winter placemaking led to some spring and summer activities that continue. But we also have evidence now that our neighborhood is starting to get some new recognition. This week, the city released a survey to get input and prioritization of how the city might use the American Recovery Plan Act funds. And as part of the survey, they asked participants to identify their neighborhood. Well, the Old East End is on the list for the first time. So that's a little success. So thanks for the opportunity to share our experience with winter placemaking.
Thank you so much, Dave. That was terrific. And it was so great to see all of the slides, and just for the also historical perspective too of the community, and the lighting that you have brought to the Szymanska Park has just been incredible. And I love the list of all the activities. I think all of us could use a copy of all those lists of great winter activities. It's amazing what you guys came up with. Thank you so much. And we will, like I said, we'll get to questions, the Q&A after all four of our presenters are done. So next up, we have the Sheldon Store project in Rupert, Vermont. Recent revitalization efforts undertaken by local residents and citizen leaders to restore and elevate the Rupert Village as the heart of community life in Rupert. And I want to invite Jane Davies to join us. She's going to be presenting on this project. She is an artist and small business owner in Rupert, and she's been active as the co-chair of the Rupert Town Green Committee. Welcome, Jane.
Thanks. And thanks to David. I already have some inspiration for our current challenges. I'm Jane Davies in Rupert. I'm president of the Rupert Village Trust, which is an organization that we formed in order to purchase this historic Sheldon General Store and make it into a community center and install a cafe, a commercial cafe. Rupert was a little thin on social institutions a few years ago. And a little history of the store, recent history of the store. This photograph was taken in the late 90s, and the store had closed as a store in the 80s and had been sort of abandoned and falling apart. So next slide. In 2005, a family bought it and did some significant renovations and upgrades to make it their home. Fortunately, they left the store fixtures and the character of the general store, which was really nice, kept that all intact. But they lived there for 9 or 10 years, and then they put it on the market. They were renting it out, so it was occupied, but it wasn't really being maintained, and it stayed on the market for quite a few years. And part of the challenge, next slide, is that it's a very small property, and it has not only the store, but that house you can see on the left next door, because historically the store owner lived at the house. So that presented our first major challenge, which when we were studying this, we realized we needed a septic system that would serve a restaurant, and that won't fit on this property. So we negotiated with the town to see if we could get an easement. In any case, the fallout was that the town offered to sell us the piece of land behind the store, and we have since bought that, and that's going to facilitate locating a septic system. So to the left there, you can see the house. Next slide. To the right of the store, as you're facing it, that's to the west, is town land, and that is now the Rupert Town Green. And that's a project that was in its infancy about the same time we were brainstorming what we could do with this building. So the projects are really, we're kind of working in coordination with the Town Green project, although they're separate. Rupert Village Trust is a private nonprofit. In any case, the town's offering to sell us the piece of property for the septic triggered our ability to then raise money and buy the store. So in addition to, let's see, next slide. In addition to being next to the Town Green, which you can see it here, there's some trees, we got that parking lot, we got some picnic tables out there on the Town Green to the right. Next slide. It's also right across the street from the library. And then to the right of the library there, you can see the Historical Society's little museum. And to the left of the library, you can't see the Congregational Church, which is also working on doing some community programming. Next slide. So here you can see the library from the interior of the store looking out the front window. So next slide. So once we purchased the building, this was in 2019, we opened it to the public. We had regular weekly coffee gatherings. And next slide. And so you can see how the building was really used. People came. I mean, we opened it and people came. We offered coffee and baked goods and put out the donation jar. And that kind of was more successful more quickly than I would have thought. And at this point, it was really easy to engage the community because we had these weekly events. Next slide. And so during those events, we had hosts, volunteer hosts that were serving coffee and so forth. This is board game night, which we had weekly as well. And so we, the board, there's 3 of us, were able to talk to people and ask them what they wanted to see in this future cafe and community center. Next slide. So in addition to these weekly events, we also had yoga twice a week upstairs, and that was well attended. We had these occasional events like this music jam, and we had some workshops and so forth, which were more like one-off events in addition to the weekly programming. Next slide. So then in March of 2020, we shut down the indoor activities, and a group of gardeners came together and volunteered to create and maintain gardens through the summer. This is some of the gardening crew, not all of them. So we were able to kind of continue to gather at the store via gardening. And 2020 was actually not a bad year to shut things down because we had gotten a Paul Brune grant that we used that year to do some major structural work on the building. So next slide. That year, we also hosted a Boston Marathon runner, which was fun, provided a finish line and a cheering squad. So next slide. And 2021, we decided to do monthly outdoor coffee events. So next slide. So that, made it so we could still engage the community on some kind of regular basis, but it wasn't as intensive. So next slide. So now it's fall, and outdoor programming is going to be challenging. That's why this winter placemaking stuff is really, really inspiring and really important to us right now. So we're really grateful for all of that. We are working on a planning grant. We have a planning grant, so we're working on the planning, and at the same time, we want to engage the community for outdoor winter programming. So let's just go to the next slide, which is one of the architectural drawings that we have for the future of this building. The build out there at the left will contain a staircase, a second staircase to the upstairs, which will be the community center. A lift, some accessible bathrooms, I think 2 accessible bathrooms, and then this wraparound porch, which will offer some more outdoor seating possibilities for the cafe and just outdoor gathering space. And the patio there will also offer some opportunity for that. So you can go to the next slide, which is a repeat, but it's just one of my favorite favorite images of the store. So our current challenge is to continue outdoor programming so that we can continue to engage the community. Also, like the yoga, we would like to solicit ideas from the community for small group programming indoors, because we're heating the building. We would like it to be used, but we can't have it crowded. That's just not going to work from a public health standpoint. So that's current challenge. And in the future, we expect to, well, I don't know how much of a challenge it's going to be. We're going to be looking for a cafe operator. We need someone who wants to run their own business, lease the space from the Rupert Village Trust, but they need to work pretty closely with us and share our vision of making it a community asset that's open to everybody. And we've got some really great ideas about how to partner with a commercial cafe to support them while they support the activities going on at the community center. And we've talked to a few people who are interested, but the challenge now is that we can't really nail it down because we don't really know when we're going to have this kitchen and dining space all tricked out. And so we're just sort of brainstorming that at this point. But we do see that as a future challenge. So thanks for allowing me to share this project with you.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Jane, so much. These are great images to see and really inspiring to see all the work happening in Rupert. And I love how you're just layering the different types of programming opportunities and thinking about how to do some outdoor programming as well. And it's just really fantastic. So thank you very much. And I know Jane will be around afterwards for some Q&A. And just also want to encourage folks to put their questions in the chat. And we're going to go ahead and move on to our next speaker. I'm going to introduce Meg Staloff from Wilmington Works, and she leads Wilmington Works. She'll be showcasing different types of activities they've been doing down in Wilmington to engage the community with public art and winter programming. So welcome, Meg.
So much. So I'm going to speed through, like we're doing sort of two things at once, kind of trying to activate a neighborhood. So we're going to do winter placemaking fast and then public art fast. So next slide. We'll start with winter place, which was literally winter placemaking. So we had the idea, we wanted to get people outside. We had some community groups that had done successful outdoor recreation programs in the summer and were interested in collaborating with us for winter. So we realized we had these playing fields and it's like a third of a mile to walk around. And we thought, wow, people could just do laps, like it's flat and you can park there. So to kind of take some people might be willing to go get their miles in the winter, but maybe not up for like going to a trailhead, So we were like, well, we could just use this place to make some place for, community gathering. So next slide. This just shows some of the shenanigans that went on. It's a really big, so it was hard to take pictures of people like from a distance, but here's a couple of moms on the right on skis going around the track. We would turn on the lights on Thursday nights. It's the soccer field at other times of year, so there are lights. And we're like, someone asked, who controls that electricity? Everyone's like, nobody knows, but we just turn them on and nobody seems to mind. So we turned on the soccer lights and Thursday nights. And then this is all the kids would just do this, like, it seemed incredibly dangerous, but no one got hurt sliding on the hill. So it was really fun. And it would just sort of people, we had a captive audience, right? Because you couldn't get together inside and sit by the fire. So people would just bring their snowshoes and do laps. We purchased a bunch of snowshoes as well. Next slide. So what we did was really simple. We had these dugouts that were there because it's also baseball fields at other times of year. So we just threw a bunch of solar lights on them and we would check out, we put some signage. You can kind of see our rabbit there on the side that said, welcome to Winter Place. We threw a bunch of stuff in there. Like we bought a bunch of sleds. People would donate sleds. Whenever the sleds would get broken, they just sort of magically got replaced somehow. We had like a bin full of clothes for snow people. We had that just stayed in there. We had some balls and cones and just simple stuff. And then we purchased a bunch of snowshoes. So we parked them at the library during the week where people could check them out. And apparently they were by far the most circulated item this winter. And then we had a standing order to just check out any snowshoes that were in on Thursday afternoons and haul them down. And then we would have a greeter kind of there to greet people, say hello, and hook them up with snowshoes if they needed, send them down to the sledding hill, or if it like was dangerous sledding conditions, we'd be like, nope, no sledding tonight, just run around. Yes, it was pretty simple. You know, we got just a bunch of volunteers together to deck this out. People got really into doing the put-in cups on the backstop. That's what we did. Next slide. We also got super into making these luminaries, although I'm really loving David Colley's idea for those vellum lanterns, because I was just thinking, oh my gosh, we need more light in the dugouts. So we're going to probably get into vellum lanterns this year. But we did ice luminaries, which, I mean, there's nothing more free than ice luminaries. It is frozen water, man. So we would like check out across the field and put them on the bleachers to sort of be like, what is that lovely flickering light over there? And people would go check them out. Next slide. And then this like just turned into a thing and people started making them. And so here's a few more like with buckets and balloons. And then next slide just shows when we got really crazy. It just got crazier and crazier. So we just started, we did like an online Zoom thing through our Wings family. They were doing like coffee, you know, dinner table things, just get together with your family and make ice lanterns. So we just got people to make them. I don't think I have a picture of here. We had like a huge blowout like in the end of February before daylight savings time where we just put them all out. It got kind of warm. That was the problem. So we just kind of kept making them. And then if they melted, oh well. If they got covered with snow, oh well. But we had a lot of fun and it kind of turned into a community project. Sorry about my ping there. Okay, next slide. So I just kind of shows that we got everybody. This is on the left. We have a couple of kids. We sent them, we're like, here, you guys go turn off the lights because the snow was deep. No one wanted to go to the other end of the field. It was really cold. So we sent Nico and Benny ran across. So we've got kids playing. We've got people who are, this is one of our intrepid volunteers who came every week and she went down the big sledding hill one night. She's like, I've got my senior citizen card and I'm going to go down the big sledding hill. Just really fun. We did have like kind of a wide range. We also had a bit of a captive audience too, where we had families that were at basketball practice in the old school community center gym up the hill, and they weren't allowed in last year. And so siblings and parents were like free agents and they loved the chance to come down and play. And then we also got people who would come down just to kind of go on the edge by the dugouts and see the ice lanterns. So this year, I guess next slide is like, this is what are we going to do this year? It's going to be a challenge, right? Last year, we could get people out in like 0-degree weather to put on snowshoes because it was the only way they could get together. So we are going to try and add food. We felt nervous about having food last year. So we're going to figuring out how to add hot chocolate or trying to get community groups to do a bake sale. We also have like the soccer booster booth is there. So if we just, it's just a matter of getting access to it in winter, like making it accessible. So we're gonna put our heads around that and see if we can get food, even if it's just calling our wonderful local pizza place that delivers and having them deliver 3 large pizzas at 6:30 and everybody can buy a slice to take home. I don't know, like we'll figure it out. It might be scrappy, but we're gonna try and get food. And then we're also gonna do some daytime things. So we just have pulled together some partners with our SASH support and services at home program for seniors. And then we have a new children's school opening in the community center. And so we have this great idea of having like regular programming at the same time for both those groups on Fridays when if Thursday nights, the field is really well stomped down. And then we just invite them to come on Friday afternoons. And our senior housing now has a bus that stops right in the parking lot there. So it's great. So we're going to just kind of like let those groups determine some programming and then just have it kind of weekly. Our library is going to work on, we're all saving our like juice cartons and milk cartons to freeze to make some ice, ongoing community ice sculptures. I'm donating a chest freezer at my house that if it's not cold enough, you can fill my chest freezer with water to freeze. So we're going to kind of do that. And then we're going to see if there's appetite to kind of do bigger activation to try and plan some kind of winter carnivalesque event that could continue. And everyone kept asking about ice skating, and I'm like, maybe we'll do some really scrappy pop-up ice skating. Like now I've here, you know, tarps and pipes, okay, and we've got a place, you know, in the fire department. Maybe we could just do some really, like, it's not going to be fancy, but just make some ice, you know, who knows. So what we do is kind of let it be organic and community driven, and if people want to do stuff, like, go for it. You know, we've upped our game a little bit with, we're going to put in a big culvert, and we're getting snow blowers in to just, like, our police chief and his family are going to come in and go nuts with snow blowers. 2 teenage boys. I'm sure they'll have lots of fun. Just, we're like, make some piles of snow. I don't know. And we might try and go further with that and just get more stuff happening. So now I'm going to speed jump into our other program that we're doing at the same time. We've been doing, so next slide, please. The Beaver Street Art Project, which is creating public art to help revitalize the neighborhood. Weirdly enough, kind of the same neighborhood where Winter Place happens down at the bottom of. This is the other end of that. Next slide. So we started in 2018. On the slide on the left, you can kind of see a car coming out of the street onto East Main Street, which is Vermont's Route 9 and 100. And then the second slide on the right, you kind of see from looking up at it from kind of across the street from the school. And so that wall is just a really ugly old concrete retaining wall in the middle of our downtown, which is otherwise lovely. So in 2018, we started investigating this possibility. And next slide. So we were lucky enough to get an animating infrastructure grant from Vermont Arts Council. And we used that 2019 through 2020, we did a community process to find potential artists and get a community vote. So we had a committee and we put out a call for artists, and we hired 4 artists to make us, you know, a more targeted proposal from that group. And then we chose 2, and then we put that out to a community vote. So we had 2, we had a metal sculpture and a mural. Spoiler alert, the metal sculpture won. It's a very ambitious and wonderful project. So next slide. We went to where people were to get votes on this. So this on the left is the sculpture set up at our town meetings. You can see, like, lovely in a gym somewhere on a table, but I put that thing in my car and we took it on the road. On the right, you can see kind of we had sketches and the mock-up for the mural. And so during basketball games, so that's when people were allowed in the building, we had all these families just there for, like, day-long basketball games. And so we would, like, get them to come in and not only just, like, vote, but, like, tell them about the project, show them what was happening, show them the 2 things, and, like, listen to what they had to say about it and their feedback, and then get their vote. So we not only got a vote, we got a lot of feedback. And then we took it to town meeting. I also took it to our middle high school and showed it to all the kids. So, like, both the middle schoolers and the high schoolers, and they all voted on it because a lot of them get off the school bus in that spot. And so they're going to see it every day and go to soccer games there. So we really said that, like, we care what the kids want on that wall. So next slide. We actually, the sculpture won, but what people said about it was, it feels a little generic, and could it have a little more color? So this is, this slide here shows kind of the drawing of, conceptual drawing of what this village scene turned into. And they added, like, our old fire station, which is no longer going to be with us or just used for storage, because we're making a new public safety facility, and kind of our own mountain. Like, shouldn't just be a mountain, it should be our own mountain, which is Haystack, which has a really distinctive look to it. And we wanted color. So then the artist said, well, gosh, we used to add, like, we can add a patina color wash to this Corten steel as it rusts, and add some color. So it was really important not just to get a vote from people, but to get their input. So next slide. This shows, and this is the drawing, kind of final drawing superimposed on the wall. So imagine this, it's all going to be cut out of metal, layered and welded, and they're going to hang. We decided to make brackets, which took a very long time in engineering. So we did use up all our planning money. A lot of it went into the engineering, so we were so grateful to the Vermont Arts Council for having that animating infrastructure grant, because we really had the funds we needed. So next slide shows, okay, so we did funding. How did we pay for this? So we started with the Vermont Arts Council animating infrastructure grant, and that really paid for the design process, the choice of artist. We used it all. We needed it all. It was wonderful. Then we were lucky to be awarded a Better Places grant for the construction and installation, plus a community activation, which turns out is going to be next spring. And then we did an art for art auction. We had some works donated by local artists and the project artists. And we raised some funny money there. And then we've had some support from, like, our Rotary supported us. I have a really wonderful community member who is really determined to see this on the wall and has been very generous. So we've got, you know, all the pieces. Next slide. So this shows, this is what the wall is looking like now. It's looking a little better. We just kind of resurfaced it. We fortunately didn't have to make it beautiful for a mural where no one's going to paint on it. We just needed it to be clean, and there it is. It looks so much better. And next slide. Happening in the artist studio in Chester. So this shows, this is Payne and Elise Junker are from Chester. They actually met at a craft fair in Wilmington many years ago. So they have great ties to our community. So Payne on the left there is standing with a piece of this. This is a finished piece of the first section of the sculpture, trees. So he's there for scale, Payne for scale. And then Elise on the right next to, there's a train element in it because we have these amazing, like, logging trains that would come over and down the river. So there's Elise for scale next to her train, which still is being put together. So stay tuned for the results. And now you can just go to the next slide, spring of 2022. And I just have to say, the same thing that happened in Rupert happened here, is that we have this vacant lot that was, you know, for years vacant lot. And while we were doing this project, it was voted by the town to become the location for a new public safety facility. And so their ribbon cutting coincides when we want to have our ribbon cutting. So we're hoping that we can have a huge party and kind of revitalize this whole neighborhood. So the Memorial Day parade will end there in front of the public safety facility. And then we're just going to close all the streets and, like, have music and ribbon cuttings galore and celebrate both the new public safety facility and the sculpture, which should be done at about the same time. So sometimes things taking a long time works out great. So that is what we have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Meg. I always love your excitement and your enthusiasm. It's contagious. The public art installation is just, it's going to be gorgeous. I can't wait to see it. It's absolutely beautiful. And kudos too to all the work you've done on the winter programming, and just, I love seeing all the layers as well, like just how now you're looking at, you know, the multi-generational component, bringing in food, and it's just, it's fantastic. So thank you very, very much. And Meg also will be around for some Q&A afterwards. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Ricarda Erickson from the Vermont River Conservancy. And Ricarda lives here in Montpelier, is a friend and is a close neighbor in some ways too. And Ricarda is the Deputy Executive Director at the Vermont River Conservancy, and she's going to be talking about how we can leverage our rivers as assets in our community to help create a sense of place. And she's going to talk about a great project here in Montpelier. Ricarda, welcome.
Thanks, Kelly. I'm glad to be here. So Vermont River Conservancy is a land trust, and we focus on protecting land along our rivers through public access, through flood resiliency, and through wildlife habitat protection. And in our 26 years of existence, we've never really considered ourselves placemakers until, next slide, we kind of stood back a little bit and looked at all the rivers in Vermont, all the rivers and streams, and this doesn't even represent all of them, and looked at all the towns and town centers and city centers that have rivers flowing through them. And oftentimes people don't engage with the rivers. So if you can think of your hometown and take a look at it here and think about the rivers that flow through your town, and think about, are there access points? Are there ways to engage with your rivers? Next slide. So in thinking about that and thinking about, okay, there are all these rivers, and this is an incredibly underutilized public asset for many communities throughout Vermont and actually throughout the country. We started 5 years ago a Face the River initiative, and this is where we started to really think about ourselves as placemakers. And we started with this Face the River initiative. We it was on the premise that we've really turned our backs to our rivers in our cities and town centers. We've built concrete, we've built buildings around our rivers. Sometimes you can't even see the rivers, they're blocked by buildings, let alone have opportunities to get down to the river. And so with this Face the River initiative, we started in a few towns, and one of which was Montpelier. And so here's a nice little Google Earth view of Montpelier. And we started this effort with presentations, public presentations. And I'd often start with this slide and say, okay, if you get to Montpelier, the park and ride, you're off the highway and you get to the park and ride, and say you're from out of state and you ask somebody, I have two questions. Where can I get gas for my car? And where can I get into the river? Or where can I go sit by the river? The first question is super easy. There's like 9 gas stations lining our rivers. And the second question is hard. There's very few access points in Montpelier to get to the river, to enjoy the river. So starting with that question, and then asking the next question, which is, how do you want to engage with your rivers? A simple question. And so our presentation, you can go next slide. Our presentation started with that question and started with that vision of limited access to our rivers. But in order to really think about what could be and how people might want to engage with our rivers, we had to take a step back and do a historical perspective of our rivers in Montpelier. And I think that in looking ahead a lot and in envisioning what could be, part of it is honoring the history of the place and what of that history do you want to continue to honor and have it be an important part of the story and the vision moving forward. And through that historical journey, the feedback that we received at these public meetings was confluences in rivers are incredibly important places. So right here is the 1929 image of the confluence of the North Branch under that railroad bridge and the main stem of the Winooski rivers. So right in the heart of downtown. And through these presentations, again and again, people noted this as a special spot that they really wanted to see livened up, some vibrancy there, some access. And so Vermont River Conservancy took that to heart, and we got some funding to do a design and feasibility study for what it would look like to have a park at the confluence of these two rivers. So next slide. And actually this one, I think you might need to advance like 3 times because it has some questions. Yeah, thank you, 2 and 3, one more. There you go, that's good. So this is just a slide from one of the presentations that we gave. Once we identified this as a special place and we got that funding, then we went back and did more presentations, community outreach, pop-up events, you know, with sticky notes and people just being able to share their thoughts of what they might want to do at a Confluence River Park. And I think it's really helpful for me. This whole workshop has been so informative and helpful for me in thinking about, in hearing from all of you, how placemaking happens when it's really based on community feedback rather than an idea that you're bringing to the community, instead hearing from the community what they want. And I think these questions are important for us to continue to ask as we move on in the design process for the Confluence Park, in that I want to make sure we're being as inclusive as possible. And so for asking all different user groups, how would you use this? What would you like to see? What are some considerations and needs to be met? So next slide. So through, again, just a robust series of public engagement events, meetings, we got a lot of feedback about how people would want to use this space. And in addition to all of these listed here, we also had an advisory committee of 17 professionals or community members throughout the state who came from different backgrounds, planners, Montpelier Live we had represented, and different organizations representing different user groups of the future park. So next slide. So eventually through that process, we came up with a final conceptual design. And we had we had some underlying goals from VRC's perspective, and that was to have accessible river access. We wanted to keep in mind this idea of facing the river, and we didn't want to lose that with a terrestrial park. We wanted to incorporate the river in this park. And then, as you can imagine, this is a small space, which you'll see in a slide coming up. Actually a pretty tiny space. And so we were considering so many different needs. And as you can imagine, challenges came up and how to balance all those differing needs. And one thing, there's a lot of interest in kayak, a whitewater wave in the river. And so balancing that with making sure that it's accessible for wheelchairs, for people with limited mobility to be able to get down to the river as well. So there was a lot of different differing needs to consider and to balance in this small space. And let's go to the next slide. And this is where we're learning as we go. So this is a drone shot from last year of this spot. As you can see, it is a very small space on either side, that grassy area on either side of the multi-use path. But it also has such potential to be this vibrant spot in a transformational park. As you can see, it's people driving in on Memorial Drive, that road across the way, can see this park. And if they see people in the river, if they see people on the land, I think it will encourage people to see rivers as an open space resource that can be part of our community and built in more to our community. And one of the other challenges that I mentioned is, well, small space and considering many needs. And then also in, as I mentioned, we're a land trust, so we don't have a lot of experience in placemaking, but what we do have is a commitment to hearing different needs. And one issue that comes up again and again in Montpelier is how to consider the needs of those experiencing homelessness and our parks. And we know that this will be something that we need to proactively address. We're in the space as it stands now, we're already, people are camping out there, people are living under the bridge. And so we don't have an answer right now, but we are committed to seeking the input of people who do have experience working with people experiencing homelessness. So on our new, we have a 2.0 advisory committee, and we have representatives for homeless shelters, and we have a liaison communicator who is able to share messages with those experiencing homelessness in terms of like a lot of the work that we're doing now. We're doing a lot of surveys and permitting and soil boring. So big machines there digging into the soil. So we're communicating like heads up, there's going to be machinery there, et cetera. So that's one way we're addressing that, but definitely something that we need to be proactive about. And I don't want to consider that as an afterthought. I want it to be inclusive in our thinking and in our design. So next slide. So lastly, this is a sign that will go up soon on site to continue to keep that community engagement alive, because right now it's not a very pretty site. It's got garbage littering it. It has graffiti. It has broken glass. And we want to keep that vision alive for the community of what it could be. And so the sign will be up with a QR code to more information, and very grateful for Laura Perez in the breakout group I was just in, and she talked about how to be more inclusive with signage. So I will consider that with a QR link. And yeah, we're at the point we have about two years more of work before we have a park, but it's been a lot of fun working on it. It's gained momentum. And what I am really inspired by is that it started 100% from the community. So this is a park really, truly for the people, by the people. So that's what we're proud of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. That was excellent. Excellent job. I feel like I learn something new always when I hear you speak about the Confluence Park, and just also Face the River campaign. The Vermont River Conservancy has spearheaded such an important campaign. And I put a note in the chat. I just love that visual map of all of our water resources and rivers. I think it's just stunning. And I think all of our presenters did such a fantastic job of really focusing in on what the assets you already have in your community and how you can build on those, right? It's not about changing who your community is. It's about leveraging the assets that are already there. And all four of you have just done an excellent job. Your communities are lucky to have you. I do want to just encourage everybody to put any questions that they have in the chat, or you can use if you go down to the bottom of the toolbar, use the reactions, and you can raise your hand if you have a question, and I can call on you and you can come off of mute and ask your question of either Ricardo, Dave, Meg, or Jane. And just also, again, thank you to our panelists for preparing such wonderful, inspiring presentations for us. I also want to just do two quick little housekeeping pieces before we get to some of the questions. One is, if people were sharing any links in the breakout sessions, if you could repost those, because we're not able to save the chats in the breakout rooms, and that way we can get those links out to the entire group. And then the second piece is just that in collaboration with Community Workshop, we, ARP, worked on a DIY cookbook with Community Workshop. Rebecca Sanborn-Stone put the link in there. It's some really great, we call them recipes, so that if you want to be able to do this, do it yourself placemaking. And I love how Ricardo shared that she didn't see herself as a placemaker before and now does, which is just terrific. There's some great tools in that DIY cookbook. And also in collaboration with Community Workshop, we host monthly placemaking meetups that are a little bit more informal. And each month we have a theme. Our December 2nd placemaking meetup will be from 12 to 1:30. So we're going to be focusing even more on winter placemaking. We'll share more of the specifics on what aspects of winter placemaking, and then also planning for our 2022. So we'll share those links out afterwards as well, but just wanted to put a little plug in there for that. So I'm just going to check the chat, see if any questions have come up in there. Lots of praises for all of you for your projects. And I'm just scanning the group real quick just to see if any hands are up. All right. So one question that I had, and they're a little bit more sort of tactical in nature, but I know, Meg, you shared that you set up a sort of loaning library of winter equipment, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that. I know that that's something that we get a lot of questions about, just like how you set something up like that. It's certainly has been identified as a need among a lot of communities. So if you could share a little bit more on that, that would be great.
So we have a really small community, like we're just over 2,000 people or just around 2,000 people. So we are totally on the honor system. We just threw it out there and let it be there and nobody took anything. Like even I was like, oh, even the snow shovels, we had shovels there in case people needed to move stuff. And, you know, I just wrote on it, winter place, you know, and the sleds. And then like every time like sleds would get broken because, you know, those plastic sleds, they break. I mean, I don't even buy them for my kids anymore. So, but amazingly, like sleds would get broken and then like people would just bring more sleds. So I think we ended up, even though some sleds broke, we ended up with more sleds than we started with. So honestly, like we just had faith that people are not going to come down and steal stuff really out of the dugout. Like they're just going to use it and put it back. You know, we had a little sign that said, and there was a sign that said, you're welcome to use whatever's in here, just put it back when you're done. Kind of like, I think people are almost like afraid to use stuff that's not theirs because, you know, rather than people are like, oh, it's going to get stolen. I'm like, no, I'm just afraid people aren't going to use it because they're going to be like, what do you mean? There's just free stuff I can use. So we just kind of, you know, I say just go for it. Don't worry about it. Like get someone, if someone wants to donate some stuff, get donations of stuff and just let it be there free to use and just tell people that it's there free to use and people will come and just use it. I mean, honestly, I guess we're just in a small town, but it was totally on faith. Now the snowshoes were a little different. We did have the library keep those and then they were able to check out for free, but we would just have them there. And so we're sort of thinking now we're going to have programming on Thursday nights and then Friday afternoons. And we're like, well, we can probably just leave the snowshoes in a tub with a lid on it. And, you know, they'll probably be fine overnight. Hopefully not. Hopefully we're not proven wrong. So we just honestly, people aren't used to stuff being free. In a way, you almost more have to tell people that it's okay to use this stuff than you have to tell them not to steal it, at least in our town. So I say just reach out to your community. You know, if there's a ski and skate sale and they have leftovers, they don't know what to do with, be like, we'll take anything that's safe and usable and just put it there.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Absolutely. Thank you very much. I know that we'll be able to share more information out about that as well, because we do get a lot of questions on the importance of being able to loan out winter equipment and being able to share that with the community at large. So thank you again to all four of our presenters. You did a fantastic job. And if you wouldn't mind also just popping your emails in the chat. So if folks want to reach out to you directly, that they can, if you're comfortable with that, that would be wonderful. And this will conclude our workshop for day 2. And I just want to thank, on behalf of AARP, thank all of our presenters and our partners and all of you for participating in this workshop, bringing your energy and your expertise to enriching and contributing to our discussions and the work that we'll go on to do afterwards. We certainly know that building livable communities takes a long time to build and sustain over time, but we also believe that quick actions and incremental improvements can be the critical spark for longer term progress. So my hope is that for all of you, that you found something that was inspiring today, and that you were able to connect with somebody new as well. And we all must continue to be those connectors and those conveners for social change. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing. And I hope that I get the chance to meet some of you in person. Hopefully next year we will be doing this placemaking workshop in person. So thank you all. And just also another plug that the AARP winter placemaking microgrants are available at the amount of $4,000 each, and the deadline will be November 12th. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or ideas about a project. And so thank you all, and until next year, I guess, or for those who want to join us in December. Thank you.